Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here. And you are very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. Are you feeling charitable? Are you feeling charitable? Then smash the subscribe button and the like button, and please do follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Man. And welcome to Thursday's edition of the DC Daily. Mick, why aren't you calling it the DCEU Daily anymore? Because the DC Daily has been cancelled because they're a bunch of Zack Snyder haters. So now I'm taking over the title of the DC Daily and hoping, can't even get my words out today, hoping that I get some people watching this one. And I promise you're going to have a lot more fun watching this than you did watching them. Anyway, so today we are dealing with another Superman movie article. So basically, Heroic Hollywood, forgot his name, Humberto Gonzalez, has done another 4-minute video over on YouTube saying how Man of Steel 2, or reiterating how Man of Steel 2 isn't a priority at Warner Brothers. There is no Man of Steel 2, there never was. Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice was always Man of Steel 2. We've discussed this before. Now, this has come up again. Now, in a moment, instead of listening to Humberto's video, I'm going to read out Screen Rant talking about this. But before we do that, we have to look at the history of Superman on the big and on the small screen. So, Superman obviously was created in 1938 as a comic book character. Then they went on to radio, where the radio show producers actually created a lot of the things that are synonymous with Superman right now, like Kryptonite. And like Perry White instead of George Taylor, introducing Jimmy Olsen and things like that. Very successful, everyone. Millions of people were listening to the radio. If there's any elderly people around who used to listen to that Superman radio TV show, they'll tell you they loved it. Right. Then they had like little matinees in the middle of other movies in the cinema. And George Reeves did one. Then they commissioned a George Reeves New Adventures of Superman TV show, or The Adventures of Superman. This went for 4 or 5 years, did it? Maybe even 6 years? No, I think it went for 7 seasons, right? Not the kind of long seasons we get today, but George Reeves is one of the great Superman, right? He's one of the great actors to play Superman. So historically, that's said. So he was a success. So then we had like the Superboy TV show, which wasn't the most popular thing in the world, but there's a lot of people still out there, like men my age. I never used to watch it. I watched a couple of episodes. It wasn't for me. But it was an okay show, and people liked it, but it wasn't a success. And so we went from Superboy to Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, starring Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. Or really, we should say starring Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain. Now, that show was very successful for a time. I think especially for the first 2-3 years. People got bored of it by the 4th year. They got married. People lost interest. But it was a successful show. And then we had Smallville. Smallville is a successful version. It's a prequel. It's a pre-Superman story. It's beautiful, compelling, and it went for a decade. So Tom Welling's version of Clark Kent, a.k.a. Superman Kal-El, very successful. People love him. And the Lex Luthor, Michael Rosenbaum in that series is still kind of, especially for me, he's the best live-action version of Lex Luthor. You know, there's no question about it. It's a fact. I know people like Eisenberg. I like Eisenberg, right? But Eisenberg isn't Michael Rosenbaum and what he was able to do on the show over 7 seasons, right? That's just my opinion. It doesn't have to be your opinion. Right. So after Smallville, there was a very, very, very big... Well, there was actually... We have to go back to Smallville, actually, because then in 2006, we had Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. Smallville was still active then. So very interesting, because they created a different kind of Superman than we saw on Smallville. Now, Superman Returns was deemed to be a failure, although it did make nearly $400 million at the global box office, which isn't a great deal of money for a Superman movie. And they spent $250 million on it. It had a budget of $250 million, filmed in Australia. So there was a lot of high hope from Warner Brothers. This could be a new era of Superman movies. Bryan was very, very respected and fancied because of his first 2 X-Men movies, right? People may have not liked that film, but Brandon Routh was deemed as a great Superman. And I think we could say that Kevin Spacey, whatever we think of him now, was a pretty good, solid Lex Luthor. And he did actually say he modelled his Lex, not on Gene Hackman, even though that's the Lex he was actually playing, but on Michael Rosenbaum's interpretation. Very interesting. So we go from Superman Returns to the ending of Smallville in 2011. And then very quickly we heard that Christopher Nolan and David Goyer were penning a script for a new era, a new Superman, and they would call it Man of Steel because the Superman Returns sequel was going to be called Superman Man of Steel. So they were going with that title. So Henry Cavill was cast, Zack Snyder was directing. We had a new era. So we had Man of Steel, divisive, but still a lot more people liked Man of Steel. I'm talking in the mainstream than Batman v Superman, which is the Man of Steel 2 everyone keeps on going on about. So is that era a successful one? It's a difficult thing to deem. I think everyone says that Cavill is a great Superman, but again, the opinion on Zack's version of Superman is very divided. So you could hardly call it a success, but you could say that basically Henry Cavill is a success as Superman. But I've missed the real deal. I've missed Christopher Reeve as Superman, right? So in 1978, Superman had a movie, Superman the movie, starring Christopher Reeve, directed by Richard Donner, written by Tom Mankiewicz and Dick Donner. One of the biggest successes. You know, people are still calling Christopher Reeve their Superman. So it was an amazing success. Now, can you call that era of Superman, live-action Superman, a success? You can call Christopher Reeve a success and Margot Kidder a success. People love those versions of the character. Superman the movie was a big success. But in terms of, and Superman 2 was quite successful, but that film had production problems. They did to Richard Donner what they did to Zack Snyder. They dumped him. And even though Chris got to play Superman again in 3 and 4, without Dick Donner, that leader, that sense of family and vision had gone. The same as what happened with Zack Snyder. But the difference is with Zack, he's back now. You know, he's working on his version of Justice League, and we're going to go into that a lot more. So Henry Cavill could have the opportunity that Christopher Reeve never did. So now we're up to date with the history of Superman in live action, although I haven't mentioned Tyler Hoechlin, first in Supergirl, and now he's getting his own Superman and Lois TV show, and it's going to be very different to what we're used to, so that's going to be interesting as well. So, as I said, last night, the news broke from Humberto Gonzalez that Man of Steel 2 isn't a priority at Warner Media. So, let's see what all the fuss is about. Why Man of Steel 2 reportedly isn't a priority at Warner Bros. One of the reasons why Man of Steel 2 reportedly isn't a priority at Warner Bros. Is because of J.J. Abrams' Bad Robots deal with Warner Media. Here's why Man of Steel 2 reportedly isn't a priority at Warner Bros. Released back in 2013, Man of Steel kicked off what's known as the DC Extended Universe, introducing audiences to Henry Cavill's Superman. Cavill reprised the role in both Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice and Justice League. But he hasn't appeared in a DC movie since. That could be changing soon, however, as Cavill is said to be in talks for a Superman return as a cameo in an upcoming DCEU installment. Cavill's Superman will of course be seen in Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max next year, but fans remain curious if he'll ever take on a substantial role in a new project. Specifically, there are questions if a Man of Steel 2 will ever come into fruition. But as of now, that movie is not in development. The reasoning for that allegedly has to do with WB's new partnership with J.J. Abrams. According to Heroic Hollywood, Man of Steel 2 isn't moving forward in part because of Abrams' production company Bad Robot's $500 million deal with Warner Media that was finalised last year. Ever since then, there have been rumours of Abrams being involved with a new Superman movie, as an insider explained to Heroic Hollywood how this affects Man of Steel 2. If your plan is to attract an A-list filmmaker like J.J. Abrams to direct such a property like Superman, they're going to demand they cast who they want in the title role. We're going to talk about this, don't worry. It's important to keep in mind that this is a rumour for the time being and should be taken with a grain of salt, but it makes sense. If Abrams comes up with an idea for a fresh take on Superman, WB would likely let him work with the actors he wants. Through Matt Reeves, the Batman, the studio's already shown they aren't going to force directors to be beholden to the old DCEU cast. J.K. Simmons played Commissioner Gordon in Justice League, but Jeffrey Wright takes over the role in The Batman. WB seems to have moved past trying to emulate the Marvel formula of singular, interconnected, shared universe and instead are focusing on crafting quality standalone movies. That means giving directors some semblance of creative freedom. Abrams could very well decide he wants to work with Cavill, considering he helms a Superman movie. Considering he helms a Superman movie in the first place, but he'd have the option to go a different route. But before WB moves full steam ahead on an entirely new version of Superman, they might want to wait and see what happens with Cavill's return if it's well received. It could be used as a springboard to give Cavill a larger role in the DCEU moving forward. Should that happen, then it's unlikely the studio would let Abrams recast the superhero. It's one thing to have Ben Affleck's Batman pop up in the Snyder Cut the same year the Batman hits theatres, but WB would want to avoid dueling Superman on the big screen. That could be slightly confusing for general audiences, especially if it isn't handled properly. Since it's one of WB's flagship properties, Superman isn't going to stay on the shelf forever. It better not. He should never be on the shelf. But time will tell who will play him. Now, so 2 weeks ago, as I said, this cropped up again. And we spoke about it, and we have to talk about, these things again, right? J.J. Abrams is going to write and direct his own Superman movie, whether you like it or not. This is a fact. Now, what we don't know is if he's going to carry on Cavill's Superman or do his own. Now, he could very well direct Henry Cavill in a brand new Superman film, in a brand new story that doesn't interconnect with Snyder's verse. But he's Snyder's Superman. He's still Snyder's Superman. He still did everything he did in BVS and Man of Steel, of course. But this could still be, JJ's own Superman vision, just using Henry Cavill. That could happen, right? Or it's the other theory that I've had for weeks now, that JJ will cast his own Superman, maybe even an actor of colour. I'm not ruling that out right now, and use the other version of Superman from the comics. I forgot what he's called, but he is a person of colour. He could go that way, or he could just basically choose another actor to play Kal-El. We shall see. Then, over on HBO Max, Henry is Superman and Clark and Kal in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Then, he could be Snyder's Superman again in Justice League Season 2 and 3. Because I think they're going to allow Zack to finish off his arc. So this could be, Zack Snyder's Justice League could be a show on HBO Max that goes for 5 or 6, 7 seasons. Who knows? And then that's done. That could be the reality, that Henry will be on that side of the premise and not cinematically anymore. Because these rumours of cameos just don't make sense. Especially if JJ's going to recast him. But we'll see. So there's two options here. What I've just said about Henry carrying on in Zack Snyder's Justice League TV series, or Henry being involved in that and being J.J. Abrams' Superman as well. So we just don't know what's going to happen there, and we're going to have to wait and see. So I think that Humberto Gonzalez has been very, very devious by doing this whole article, this video on YouTube, because he knows damn well that JJ is getting the film. This is basically, they are prepping us. They are prepping us for the announcement. And just before we get this official announcement, they want to get another clickbait article in to get us all talking. And it's working. They're getting me talking and you're here watching this video, right? But so even though I don't exactly know what's going on, either Henry is JJ's Superman, because JJ is doing a Superman franchise, like it or not. Probably now, if it's not Henry, he's going to be working in a new kind of Earth 1 type of universe, JJ. And then Henry's Superman will be involved over on Zack Snyder's Justice League series, which is still exciting because we still get to see him as Superman, right? It still happens. Everybody wins, basically. Now, we need to go over the subject of J.J. Abrams being in charge of Superman. And we can only do that by looking at his original project, Superman Flyby. Now, we've already done this on this channel months and months ago, but we need to refresh ourselves on how he sees Superman. I do think it's really important when we look at how J.J. Abrams sees Superman. Of course, so much has changed now with the culture war and how people like JJC doing movies as such. So it'll be very interesting what kind of commentary will be in his Superman trilogy, because it will at least be a trilogy. So hopefully if he sticks around, which is not a good habit of his, but let's see. Anyway, these incidents of Abrams over-explaining are peppered throughout the draft. Ty Zor is essentially General Zod, but instead of a mere rival, he's Superman's angrier cousin. Clark's glasses aren't a disguise. They're custom-made with lead spec lenses to help the young boy control his vision powers. Clark Kent is a college senior with an undeclared major until he runs into a feisty journalism student named Lois Lane at a frat party, thereby changing the course of his career. So already you've got kind of more of a reason, a justification why he ends up at the Daily Planet, which I kind of like. As if the Stalker criticisms of Superman Returns weren't pointed enough. By the way, I never saw Superman as a stalker in Superman Returns, but it's whatever your dark mind wants to interpret. Jonathan Kent drops dead of a heart attack when news of Clark's first excursion as Superman reaches him. Jor-El visited Earth decades earlier to determine whether the Kents were worthy of raising his son. You get the picture. So this kind of happened in Smallville as well, and it was done really well in Smallville. So I like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Like Man of Steel, Superman Flyby shows off a Krypton full of giant robots, war suits, and toy-ready weapons known as blast staffs, wielded skillfully by a decidedly proactive Jor-El, described as a king at one point in the draft. Abrams offers copious notes throughout the script, going beyond commentary, characterization, stage directions into musical cues and other suggestions in what would have been a refreshing twist. On one of his notes reads that all scenes on Krypton are spoken in Kryptonian. We already know that Zack Snyder wanted to do that, but he decided against it. I like that. An actual language we will develop and calling for subtitles during important passages of dialogue. So already JJ and Zack have got one thing in common. Zack was going to do that, but I suppose he chickened out, which is not like Zack, by the way. When summaries of this draft hit the internet, the backlash centered on a number of deviations from the established mythology. At the top of that list is the fact that Superman isn't sent to Earth in order to escape the destruction of the planet, but rather to protect him from his evil uncle, Jor-El's brother, Katazor. You see, folks, it was 2002 and Hollywood was drunk on the success of films like The Matrix, the Star Wars prequels, and the Lord of the Rings films. This meant that Superman Flyby was intended as the first act of a trilogy. Sounds good to me. One that centered on Kal-El as an heir to the throne of Krypton with a mysterious prophecy he must fulfill. There's more of this throughout the draft as we're introduced to minor Kryptonian characters like Prodeus, who Abrams promises we won't get to know until the next film of the series. That sounds like JJ, so his critics will be out in force if they ever read this or if they've read this before. So far, it sounds very intriguing. Look, very JJ Abrams, that's for sure. Of course, Ty Zor finds his way to Earth, and the expected mayhem ensues. In fact, given what's on the page here, Man of Steel, and for the matter, the Transformers movies would like a plucky little indie film for comparison. Superman's battle with Ty Zor and his ninja-like Kryptonian cronies, Baz-Al, Khan, and Alta, and their giant robot war machines isn't confined to Metropolis or Smallville and Gotham City, which also gets a mention, but do considerable damage to the pyramids at Giza and the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And let's just say that the controversial ending of Man of Steel had some precedent here as well. If you found Abrams' Star Trek films too subtle, then you would likely have been in heaven watching his Superman. The first draft is 139 pages and certainly tries to do too much. Here we go. Including a Doomsday-less death and a resurrection of Superman sequence. Fine with that. Which feels so shoehorned in. Here we go. You know what, these people, right? What do you mean shoehorned in? What do you mean? I don't understand that criticism. I read it all the time. Oh, it was so shoehorned in. Everything's shoehorned in, right? That's the point of writing. You shoehorn in something into your story, right? Anyway. That it could only be a result of a Warner Brothers studio edit inciting that the best-selling Superman saga in decades should somehow make it to the screen. Wait, that sounds familiar. Think about how certain sections of Star Trek Into Darkness were crowbarred into the narrative, and you're on the right track. And then, of course, there's the other matter that made waves when this draft leaked. Lex Luthor is a CIA agent. That's okay. Working in the Special Operations Division, who spends his time chasing down reported UFO evidence. Lex is a clever, well-written, fun character, and it seems that his general mistrust of Superman is simply a result of his unique job description, until it's revealed in the final pages that he's actually a Kryptonian sleeper agent. Again, I like it. It's new, it's fresh. What's wrong with that? Where are we? I've lost my place now. Seems that he's genuinely blah, blah. It's revealed in the final pages that he's actually a Kryptonian sleeper agent with all of the abilities of Superman. I wish I could say that this reads better than it sounds. Doesn't sound bad to me, mate. But it doesn't, especially after all-out carnage from the battle between Superman and the other Kryptonians aided by the armies of the world, Superman's death and rebirth, and all of the civil war and strife still happening back on the decidedly non-exploded Krypton. It's a bit much. It's not a bit much. It's exciting. It's awesome. And it's epic. And I believe this is what audiences want to see. Anyway. Because we can't have... Look, we are not in 1978 anymore. Without Christopher Reeves and Dick Donners and Tom Mankiewicz Superman and vision for that, I wouldn't have loved Superman. I still wouldn't. I won't be doing these videos today, as I've said so many times. But the point is, you just can't have Superman winking and nodding and smiling and flying about. There has to be some darkness. There has to be a battle. And if you don't get that, I don't know what you're doing, even talking about films and storytelling and TV. Anyway, while both drafts are famous for the controversy they stirred, it should be noted that they are fairly enjoyable reads. Oh, changing your story now, are you? How can you hate something and say it's an enjoyable read? The dialogue is lively and smart, and despite my Superman purist instincts howling at Krypton's continued existence, which I like, by the way, Abrams crafts it in such detail with its own language, specific geography, races. There are intelligent non-humans that also populate Krypton, and even seemingly insignificant details like board games that it's fascinating read. Clark Kent's awkward persona isn't an act, but rather a result of years of living in a world that he fears. He could shatter with a misplaced display of emotion. I like that. I really like that. That's how Superman would be like. He's so powerful. He'd be so afraid to even talk to someone. I like that. I feel like we see a little of that in Spock of the recent Star Trek films, but there's a hint of this in the Clark Kent of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman as well. Here's the thing. When Flyby works, it really cooks. Like his work on Star Wars in The Force Awakens, Abrams just knows how to capture the appropriate nostalgic tone. For massive franchises, after Superman's rescue of Air Force One, there's a sequence similar to the first night on the job sequence from Superman the movie. Only here, there are no cats stuck in the trees. Instead, Superman is rescuing Japanese fishing boats, wow, from tsunamis, wow, stopping erupting volcanoes in Peru, wow, presumably in a more convincing fashion than that was on display in Superman for the Quest for Peace. Anyway, we don't have to talk about one thing by putting down another, do we? And even making the time in proper Golden Age Superman style to stop a wife beater in his tracks. Well, that's J.J. Abrams, you know. That's the toxic masculinity thing. They're going to do that. That's fine. That's fine. Wife beater in his tracks. In the second draft, some of these are stubbed out for a daring daylight jewelry store robbery in London. An avalanche in Austria. Wow. This is great stuff. Abrams describes Superman's screen presence and how other characters react to him as like seeing every great sports figure of all time rolled into one at the height of their career, only airborne. With the right director, there would certainly have been a few magic moments, and it's all but certain that Superman's battle with a giant Kryptonian mech known as a Rouser would have been an impressive spectacle. Absolutely. But when it doesn't work, it's a groan-inducing. There are significant pacing issues in the first draft, particularly in the last act. Here we go. It feels like these events take place in the time it takes to read them. That doesn't make sense. Of course, it could take the same time as it is for you to read them. You're not watching it, you're reading it. Anyway, in the space of about 30 pages, Superman debuts, becomes an idol of millions, and loses that trust thanks to the actions of Ty-Zor. Sounds amazing. And his buddies die. Dies, becomes loved again, and returns when it's on the big battle wolf. What is wrong with that? The second draft is dated October 24th, 2 days before my birthday, by the way, 2003. Runs 125 pages compared to the first draft's 139, and it's the first time the title Flyby actually appears on the page. Early on, the religious nature of the prophecy that Kal-El will eventually fulfill is played up, and there's some mention of a Kryptonian holy land named Mena, which appears to be an entire continent. That sounds amazing. While Krypton isn't destroyed in this version, a chunk of it is, as powerful bomb planted by Ty-Zor detonates, leaving Krypton looking like a planetary apple with a bite taken out of it. Great idea, best of both worlds. The early sections are tightened up considerably, losing truly awful growing up Kent musical montage, which featured "I kid, you're not a Kryptonian," a dirty diaper joke. Anyway, we'll move on from that because this guy's purposely being negative. Luthor is no longer a Kryptonian sleeper agent, but a dishevelled crackpot and a UFO enthusiast who stumbles on a Kryptonian pod sent, of course, by Ty-Zor to track down Kal-El with a dying soldier inside. Pod sent, of course, by Ty-Zor to track down Kal-El with a dying soldier inside. Wow. The alien encounter leaves Lex bald, but also enlightened, and he goes from a crackpot to a super genius thanks to a rather nebulous Kryptonian mind meld in that isn't adequately explained. It's only a draft, mate. That's why it isn't adequately explained. You're not watching the movie. Lex is no longer a CIA agent in this draft, and he soon becomes the more familiar billionaire head of LexCorp that fans had come to expect, and he's running for president, which is part of the comics. The bizarre Kryptonian mind meld aside, it's remarkable how making Lex a more traditional and central piece of the plot makes Flyby feel that much more like an actual Superman movie, even before we get to see Superman in action. The traditional dynamic is here, with Lois Lane investigating the corrupt billionaire while he experiments with a dangerous alien technology in secret labs. And of course, Superman's rescue of Air Force One, whose distress was engineered by Luthor, is the revelation Lex needs to confirm what he had seen all of those years earlier. The first meeting of Superman and Luthor plays like something out of Superman the Animated Series. Wow! And of course, when Superman refuses to join Luthor's plans for conquest, Lex activates a beacon that will lead Ty-Zor to Earth. Brilliant! He does the same thing in Batman v Superman, really, doesn't he? That's how Steppenwolf comes, and later Darkseid. So, less time is spent on Krypton in the second draft, perhaps because of the Ahem fracture state it was left in, or perhaps in an attempt to deliver a movie that could be made for less than $300 million. But while Krypton still hasn't been totally wiped out, it's clear that the destruction of the continent of Mena has had long-reaching consequences, and the planet is in danger of falling out of orbit and finally meeting the fate that fans expect. Just not yet. That's an interesting way of doing it, though. It could ultimately be destroyed, but I'm okay with not being destroyed. Right. Falling out of orbit and finally meeting the fate that fans expect. Just not yet. Other issues that had bothered folks in the leaked first draft are also eliminated, notably the super suit's weirdly alive nature, as well as any mention of Jimmy Olsen being, what's that, effeminate, whatever that says, and some unfortunately dismissive and unfunny jokes at the expense of his sexuality. Oh, shut up. The ninja-like Kryptonian warriors from the first draft are absent, and the battle between Superman and Ty-Zor and his giant mech is confined to Metropolis, which is a shame. While Superman once again dies and is reborn, which I like, it happens in a matter of minutes, and the pacing issues from the earlier draft are mostly resolved. Both versions of Flyby end the same way, with Superman boarding the craft he arrived into to fly off to Krypton and pursue his destiny. In the second act of the intended trilogy, the strange Krypton stuff aside, the 2003 draft of Superman Flyby feels much more like a Superman movie than the first, and probably would have been actually affordable to film. So how close did we come to actually seeing Superman Flyby on the big screen? Pretty close. It would seem a pre-Terminator Salvation director, MCG, was set to direct. Mukji, I think his name is. We all know him, don't we? before a yes for flying took him out of the running. So, yes, that's the history of the film. So, very, very, very interesting, because we don't care who was going to direct it, because JJ wasn't confident enough to direct a Superman film back then. But what we need to talk about is, how do we think that sounds? And I know I've read that art on this channel before, but that was before JJ was going to be involved with Superman, because he is, whether we want it or not. I like the concept. I'm not saying he's going to use this concept, but I like the concept. I like the idea of Clark returning to Krypton at the end. That would give him that kind of thing. Do I stay or do I go? I had that kind of idea in some fan fiction I did for Superman as well. I like the story. I like the epicness. I like the death. I love the rebirth element of it. Of course, it's kind of being done right now with Zack Snyder's Justice League, so he may have to go down a different route. Now, am I confident about J.J. Abrams doing a Superman movie? If we're talking about the J.J. Abrams who worked on Felicity, Alias, and Lost, absolutely. If we're talking about the J.J. Abrams who did Mission Impossible 3, I really like that film, I'd say yes. If we're talking about the J.J. Abrams who did Star Trek 2009, yes, absolutely. And even The Force Awakens, which is not a very ambitious film and really retreads what happens in A New Hope, it's still a really good movie that sets up lots of kind of threads for the second movie. But because JJ didn't do the whole trilogy, it became a bit of a mess. So that element of it, I trust JJ in terms of some of his history. The problem is JJ did Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, which is really the first time the fans turned on him, but then he left. Right? So he left. Then he did Star Wars The Force Awakens. Then he left. Then he had to come back. He was never going to come back. So he has a history of starting something and not finishing it. Now, that can't be the case here on Superman. He's got an exclusive contract with Warner Media, so he's not going anywhere. This is the reason he's here. As his friend and collaborative partner Damon Lindelof has said, he's obsessed with Superman. He wants to do this. He is going to write and direct a Superman trilogy, as I said, whether you like it or not. Now, that leads us into Henry Cavill's future. Has he got a future? And these are the questions we have to delve into. So we have to look at Henry Cavill. He's had a very disjointed run as Superman. He has been in two of the most divisive movies that Superman's ever been in. These have been the most discussed, controversial movies ever. But we do like him as Superman. In fact, we love him as Superman. I don't see any reason why J.J. Abrams would recast him. At this moment in time, I think J.J. Abrams will stick by him. As I said, I don't think he would have been on that Zoom with Zack Snyder if he hadn't made an agreement with Warner Media. That's who Henry is. He's been negotiating for nearly 3 years. He wouldn't have just come on that Zoom as a favour to us, the fans, or a favour to Zack. He wants to play Superman again. I believe he is J.J. Abrams' Superman, but not in the Man of Steel sequel. In a film written and directed by J.J., that's his vision, continuing who he is. And the build-up to that, of course, is him being in a kind of multiple cameos within the DCEU. That's how I see it right now. But I don't have any knowledge, or any of my sources don't have any knowledge about Henry's future. But seeing he turned up on the Zoom, I'm going to put my neck on the chopping block, and seeing that Zack being back to finish off his vision is mainly because of JJ as well. We know that JJ demanded this. He demanded that Sujihara was ousted and so many more things. So JJ's got a lot of power here. So he's getting his own Superman movie. I think there was a compromise that he would use Henry. He nearly cast Henry for Superman Flyby. So it's all there. It's all there. So I believe there'd be no reason why he can say, hey, Henry's my Superman. In my film, yes, he's got his history in MOS and BVS, but this is now going to be a new adventure for him. So this is not Man of Steel 2. When we talk about Man of Steel 2, we talk about a direct sequel. Really, it would have to be from Zack Snyder's Justice League vision, right? So that would be a long way down the road. That's not going to happen. The closest you're going to get to Man of Steel 2 is what J.J. Abrams is doing. So either J.J. is going to cast someone new, he's going to start building up Earth 1 DC with Matt Reeves, with what he's doing with the Batman, or he will continue with Henry. But this whole thing of Man of Steel 2 not being a priority, it sounds like Superman isn't a priority. But Superman is a priority now because J.J. Abrams is obsessed with Superman and he wants to be in charge of the property. And he will be. But I think one way or another, Henry Cavill will be Superman again. And if it's not in the cinematic part of the franchise, it'll be in the streaming side of the franchise on HBO Max. And what Humberto Gonzalez has done is just try to get an easy clickbait 4-minute video. Because we all know Man of Steel 2 isn't happening or it's not a priority. But Superman is. Don't you worry. Superman is coming back to the big screen. He's already on the small screen. He will be back on the small screen with Tyler Hoechlin. So exciting times if you're a Superman fan. Comment down below. Like, share and subscribe. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more DC Daily. See you again soon.